they were just thrown to the side, beaten, maced, arrested. And not just the advocates, they were going after anyone who was not police. I saw journalists get thrown to the ground, journalists get arrested. I saw people get maced, I got maced, people being batoned, people being shot at with rubber bullets. I was just lucky enough not to be there when there was open gunfire. And that's not something that should be said about anyone going to protest to assert their First Amendment right. Welcome to the Know Your Rights Camp podcast.
We're your new hosts. My name is Amir, Whitaker.
And I'm Barbadillo.
And we plan on bringing you different interviews and discussions that relate to our community. And today we'll be talking about this new phenomenon, well, that's not really too new, called Cop City, but that's really Cop Cities.
Right.
So what's going on with this Cop City? What is Cop City, D?
Cop City. Well, Cop City is this big project being taken on in Atlanta, Georgia, by the city and by police associations to build this huge military complex training center for police. They're spending about $90 million on this.
Tax dollars.
Tax dollars.
That could go to so many other things.
Sure, it is. And the thing about this is they're clearing out a forest to do so. They're not using land or property that's already owned by the city. They're using land that's owned by the city that actually was designated as a natural space.
Wow.
So it's bringing the ire of a lot of folks who are advocating for environmental reasons, for those who don't like the idea that tax dollars are being spent on police, especially because this is not just training, this is military training. Right. And so the implications of that are that they feel like this is just helping add to the militarization of police in general.
Exactly. It looks more like a military base than just a simple police training facility. And Atlanta's not the only city, right, considering something like this. Yeah. And in Atlanta, we saw the intersection of the environmental rights movement with folks occupying the forest for a long time, and even some people becoming martyrs. And what was the person's name? Tortuguita was murdered by police there while trying to resist there. But we're seeing other cities trying to go in the same direction.
I think it's interesting because as people are speaking out and organizing against Cop City, the police are showing the might that they have, and this is before the facility is even being built.
Right.
There have been protests. I've been to Cop City. They are using military-grade weapons. They are shutting down protests quickly without any consideration for First Amendment rights. They are using violence to start. There is no de-escalation. And so what this indicates to me is that if this is how the police are acting before Cop City is even being built, what happens once it is built?
Exactly.
This just increases state violence, and this gives the okay that if you need to, you can invoke state violence. And that's what a lot of corporations and folks in power are doing by advocating for this Cop City.
And it's happening at different levels of government and within the system too, right? Because I know the folks in Atlanta were fighting to get like a ballot initiative there, and they were encountering resistance within the government. I know the prosecutors and folks, they're using RICO charges and different things. So it's not just the police using excessive force and killing people, but it's the entire system all cracking down on the resistance, on free speech, on people saying we don't want our funds to go towards our own murder. Instead, if this is the environmental place, let's focus on life and support and services.
Right. And I think what people need to understand is there's a greater context here. This is not just police advocating for police. These are corporate interests that have been slowly taking away from the Black families and communities in Atlanta. And you see these rich, mostly white folks moving in because they were told by the government that this is a safe space for their corporate interests. But when people started rising up in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, they were protesting police.
Right.
And so there was this fear-mongering going on that if people are protesting police, it must not be safe here. It must not be safe here for our money. And so Cop City is not just let's give morale to the police, it's let's remind the corporate interests that they're safe here, let's bolster police, and let's really crack down on people who are advocating for spending money for the people that are actually supposed to be getting that money. Right. And so it's this big ring almost of folks who are using the power that they have to squash the voices of those who are just simply asking to be taken care of the way they expect to by their government.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Calling it a ring was very fitting because the interconnections between the different things, and the city of Atlanta could use so much more investment in whether it's social services, infrastructure. There's no imagination needed to look at where we can put $90 million. And some other places, I think Tennessee is considering hundreds of millions of dollars for their cop city. There's a Stop Cop City in the Bay Area. It's happening all over because I think there's over 60 potential cop cities happening.
And that's a scary thought. And it just kind of shows that even though research shows that if you want to decrease crime, you need to decrease poverty. You need to invest in communities. You need to invest in social structures that are there for folks who need them. Cops don't prevent crime. In fact, if they're not perpetrating it, they're just showing up afterwards and not really remedying the situation. And so, again, it's this false narrative that police protect us. And then what we're seeing is now we're gonna have this whole cop city. Oh no, that's just gonna lead to, again, more state violence.
Right, it's kind of like a microcosm of what our government does internationally. We're putting different military bases in different countries, putting different police training camps and grounds all over. You see that a lot actually in urban communities in different cities where every place is either a school zone or something like that. So if you catch a charge, it's multiple charges on top of it because you're in all these different zones. So I feel like we're gonna be in a cop city zone all over the country where if they need tanks or armored material or SWAT folks, and whether it's in Memphis, whether it's in Atlanta, wherever it's at, they'll be able to snap fingers and mobilize something like that.
And after 2020, what we saw is that police are already militarized. I think it's important to point out that this is not new. This is just going further down that road. And I think it's also important to realize that the number one advocate for these cop cities are actually police associations. So that's a very powerful entity. Police associations are made up of officers, retired or current, and what they do is they really put pressure on government officials, on folks to bankroll them, to advocate for police funding, as if they don't ever get enough money. And so I think it's important to realize that as much as it's a ring, that we should realize that at the center of that ring is not just the government, it's these police associations. They're very powerful.
Oh yeah, and another thing police associations do is defend killer cops. They're the first on the line. So Tortuguita, who I believe it was upwards of 60 shots, hands up, The autopsy showed that he was clearly, or they were clearly not a threat or trying to harm anyone, and nonetheless, the police associations defended the cops who killed them. And that's what they do.
Right. And I think it's important to note that not only was he shot with his hands up, I think the autopsy showed that he was sitting down, legs crossed, hands up. That's as defensive as a stance that you could have. Defenseless, actually. So again, police associations, that's what they do. They defend these killer cops. But what's interesting is that for those who are protesting, not only are you being brutalized, not only are you getting maced to the face, not only are you being physically harmed, they're facing such intense charges. RICO charges are no joke. And not only did they go after the activists themselves, they actually went after the people supporting the activists. They went after the attorneys who were trying to defend them. They went after the jail support that was trying to get them out of jail. And they included all of them in the RICO charges, which again indicates that they really want to suppress those who stand up to police, those who stand up to these corporate interests.
Right, they're using racketeering charges that were created to go after mafias and organized crime, to go after people who are protesting. and want a forest.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And this goes back to the fear mongering regarding crime, because they're saying that these activists are terrorists. They use the word terrorism.
They have used that word. None of them were armed.
None of them were armed.
They found no guns in Cop City.
And so, again, it goes to the idea that militarization is too harsh a response to crime that can be prevented, if there is any crime, by simple funding. The solution is much easier than clearing out a whole forest, than creating these military-grade training facilities. And I think what's also important to note is that they're clearing out a forest, which is city property, but they're turning over the development deals to private companies.
Really? I didn't know that
So
part.
it's almost like they're flipping their forest into a financial stream.
For sure.
Right. So all of those interests are going to private companies for future development. So what we're seeing not only is the removal of the forest, this building of this huge military complex, but we're seeing sort of this disintegration of the city.
Right.
And that's sad to see, because if it happens in Atlanta, it could happen anywhere else.
And it shows the police aren't protecting the people, rather the interests.
Right. And so I hope what people take away from this is that ears to the ground if you hear about a cop city popping up around you. Absolutely. Be ready to take action and to advocate on your behalf. So when it comes to Cop City, I actually have a little bit of experience there. I went to Cop City to support advocates on the ground. I went, and also to see what exactly was happening, to see what we were dealing with. And what I saw was the largest assembly of police I've seen for a complex that hasn't even been built yet.
Wow.
We're in a forest, and you see folks coming from everywhere. And instead of that being an indication of this is how important it is to people that this not be built, this was characterized as, look at all these outside agitators, which is the favorite phrase of police. But yeah, maybe they are outside agitators in the sense that these are people who felt they needed to come from as far and wide as possible to stop this from happening, because they realize the precedents that this sets. There are 69 plus cop cities in the works, but this is the one that's the furthest along. And so there's this urgency that people felt, and instead of taking stock of what the people were saying and fighting for, they were just thrown to the side, beaten, maced, arrested, and not just the advocates. They were going after anyone who was not police. I saw journalists get thrown to the ground, journalists get arrested. I saw people get maced. I got maced. People being batoned, people being shot at with rubber bullets. I was just lucky enough not to be there when there was open gunfire, and that's not something that should be said about anyone going to protest to assert their First Amendment right. And so people just look at this and they see violence, but I think people need to realize that violence is never really called for in these situations. And look who's perpetrating it.
Exactly.
And this is 2 years before the complex has even been built.
No, I saw some of those videos and heard the gunshots and different things. And you hear about the people in the trees, literally. Some of them were in the trees. And not hiding from bears or any animals or anything like that. But the police were, you know, the ones attacking people there. So.
And that was a command. You know, usually police are told to withhold from all of that action unless they're told to. But once they are, it's open fire. And so that's coming from the highest authority. And again, this is before they've been fully militarized. And so it's important to see that this is going to be bad, and if this is the trend, that we have a lot of work to do.
Right, and we have to resist. And I've seen a lot, and let's celebrate the good news too, because there's been some victories in Atlanta, specifically, like the police associations, which we mentioned are a really powerful force behind Cop City. The Color of Change published a report in 2021 that highlighted corporations like Coca-Cola and others and their role in the police associations. And because of this report, Coca-Cola stepped down from the Police Association Foundation. So it's just one small little thing, but just highlighting that, like, and connecting corporate interest to policing and showing why is Coca-Cola on the board of the Atlanta Police
Right.
Foundation, and why does Coca-Cola want a cop city? You know, and connecting the dots. So to show that there is some resistance and some things happening.
Right, and if all it took was an article to come out, then if that's the smallest little thing we could do to get a win, imagine if people organize and if people really step it up, because I think there is a way to get people to hear us. I'll say us because we're all in this together, but I think there is a way for people to hear us. We just need to continue to fight and continue to be loud and continue to stand up for what we really think needs to happen, and that is no cop city.
No cop city.
No cop city.
No militarization. No militarization. No militarization
Yeah.
of policing happening here.
Right.
And we know America and its colonial empire trains different countries around the world.
Yeah.
So other countries are literally learning how to oppress their people and suppress their democracy by studying our cop cities.
So the impact of cop city is not just local, it's not just domestic, it's international in that sense.
Right.
And so I hope people realize that when we talk about cop city, it's a cute little name, but it's not very cute. The impact is huge and sounds violent. And so people need to associate that with we are creating an incubator for more state violence, as if there weren't enough.
I mean, when I hear the word cop city or the words cop city, I don't imagine a place like Disneyland or anything like that. It's, when I hear the word cop or police,
it's terrifying.
It's some of my earliest memories are seeing the police abuse parents and others, and my direct experience and different things. So it doesn't sound like a utopia to me or a place that I would want to go.
And I think it's even more ironic that they're trying to tear down a forest to put this in place. There's a lot of irony here, but that sort of can't be ignored.
A place where life grows compared to a system that
takes away life
and create that is literally one of the only parts of our government that can legally execute without accountability, because as we mentioned, Tortuguita's murderer is still free.
Right. And I think it's also important to note that this is happening in Atlanta, a city that by and large is majority black and people of color. And the people pushing this for the most part are not from Atlanta. They are not black. They are not people of color. They're coming from outside. So who really is the outside agitator?
I was just going to say, but you're the agitator, right?
Yeah. Who is the outside agitator here? We can't let folks take over the cities that people who don't have voices already are losing. We can't let folks who are losing their voice also lose their city. And so this is sort of the biggest step. If they want to talk about a military, this is an ambush. And so, again, people need to view it in that way. I think, again, people hear the phrase cop city and it sounds like a moniker that you can ignore. Not ignore, but it sounds like a moniker that's not as violent as it really is.
Right.
And so people see cop city in the headlines and they kind of move on. But I think we need to pay attention whenever we see cop city pop up in a new city.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. Please follow us on YouTube and on social media at Your Rights Camp.